So here we are continuing to follow the breaking news out of Washington. The Supreme Court rejected a challenge targeting access to a widely used abortion pill. The unanimous decision was the court's first ruling on an abortion-related case since the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. So let's bring in Dr. Ushma Upadhyay to talk a little bit more about this. She's a public health scientist and professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology and Reproductive Sciences at the University of California, San Francisco. I also want to bring in Elizabeth Sepper. She is a professor of law at the University of Texas at Austin. All right, so I think that we're going to start with just taking a look at the ruling first before we look at the argument about the drug's safety. Can you sort of break it down? Why did the court rule the way that it did?
That's to Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's to Elizabeth.
I'm sorry about that. The Supreme Court ruled that the plaintiffs here didn't have standing. They were doctors who didn't prescribe Mifepristone, one of the pills commonly used in medication abortion. They couldn't show that they were facing any particular injury from the Food and Drug Administration's approval of Mifepristone some 20 years ago. And under very standard standing doctrine, the Supreme Court said that these plaintiffs just didn't have the right to come into federal court and challenge the FDA's decision-making.
So, Dr. Ushma, talk to us about the role of this medication and what it means for the access to be allowed. In other words, what does it mean for women who perhaps need this medication but were in potentially in danger of not having access to it?
This medication, Mifepristone, has been used in the United States since the year 2000, and use of this medication has been growing consistently. It now makes up about 63% of all abortions in the U.S. So a decision against this medication would create enormous barriers for people who need this medical care. But the data are very, very clear that Mifepristone is extremely safe, extremely effective. Over 100 peer-reviewed journal publications have shown this over and over again. So it is extremely safe and effective for abortion.
Doctor, I just want to ask a quick question to follow up to what you were saying. I mean, what I found fascinating about this case, Doctor, is it was brought up by anti-abortion medical organizations, including doctors. So, I was unfamiliar with the notion of scientists being against something that is so fundamental to human biology. I understand there are lay people who have very passionate feelings about this, but scientists, can you help me understand a little bit of that?
Well, part of their argument was that there's a potential for people to need care after their abortion. And it's true, some people may need care, especially if they don't have an abortion provider near them. They may need additional care. But in this case, the plaintiffs were unable to demonstrate that this is a sufficient burden, that because medication abortion is so extremely safe, there isn't enough here to say that these regulatory approvals should be rolled back.
And, I don't know if you got a chance to hear the special report, but we heard Major Garrett say that some of the research that had been used to argue that this drug was somehow dangerous turns out to be faulty research that has since been debunked. But Elizabeth, I want to ask you about, this is a unanimous decision. What does that tell you?
It tells us that the Supreme Court is enforcing standing doctrine. The conservative movement for many years had been focused on closing the courthouse doors to litigants. This isn't a close case. It's an easy case. It should have been unanimous. And I think that's across the board. It's not a political issue. It's not an issue of abortion, but rather issue of standing doctrine. I do think it also is a reproach to the Fifth Circuit, the Court of Appeals that oversees the state of Texas, where this case was filed with Judge Kazmierek. I think it's a reproach to that circuit, which has often been far out of step, even with the radical goals of this extremely ideologically right Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to take the discussion, Elizabeth. For people who don't know, the Fifth Circuit, this federal judge that you're talking about, Matthew Kazmierek, he's the only guy. He's the only one that hears all new civil cases, and so to me that sounds unusual. I know that's the way it's set up, but that means depending on how he sees things, that's how it ended up at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Texas is one of the few districts that has some sole judge districts and has rules for assigning cases. That means that when plaintiffs come to a district, they can be pretty sure, or nearly 100% sure, who they will get. And so here we've seen conservative legal movement actors file an absurd number of cases in Amarillo, which is where this case comes from. But we also saw the Fifth Circuit largely agree with Judge Kazmierek in his ruling on standing, and that's why we ended up at the Supreme Court. If the Fifth Circuit had applied standing doctrine correctly, the Supreme Court would not have had to reverse them in this particular case.
Dr. Ushma, as you know, we've seen Texas pass laws that would allow for the suing of anyone who helps a woman get an abortion. So I'm sure that a ruling like this offers some peace of mind and some protection for medical providers.
It does provide some peace of mind, but 14 states still completely ban abortion. And so all of the barriers in those 14 states, as well as others that restrict access to abortion, they still remain. People are still struggling every single day to get this care that they need.
So what will the impact on this, Elizabeth, be on states where abortion has already been extremely restricted?
So in those 14 states where abortion is banned, they will still not have legal access to this medication in their own communities. There has been a growth of telehealth providers mailing this medication to patients in those states. It's not as easily accessible, and people really should be able to access this care within their own communities. But for the time being, at least, this means that patients in those states with restrictions will continue to be able to access this medication abortion care through telehealth, which has demonstrated to be just as safe and effective as getting these medications through in person from a clinic.
Okay, we want to thank Elizabeth for joining us. Really appreciate it. And Doctor, we have a few more questions for you. I'm curious. I don't know what other sort of cases are kind of in the pipeline, but I'm curious, as you've watched the fallout from the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, what are your concerns as you've watched different states pass different laws?
I have major concerns. Louisiana is passing laws to, make this medication as restricted as opioid, when the safety profile has shown time and time again this is a very safe medication. There's no concerns about addiction with Mifepristone. So I'm concerned that many states across the country, even those that already have abortion bans in place, will continue to enact state-level laws that restrict medication abortion, which has been a lifeline to many people, pregnant people who need medication abortion and are unable to travel. And that means young people, adolescents, low-income people, people who can't take time off from work to make that 6 to 8 hour trip.
So ultimately, we've been talking about this, doctor, but the fact that this medication, which you say has been prescribed for many, many years, going back as far as the year 2000, I'm still struggling to understand why there are some people who sought to restrict access to women who might potentially need it. Help me unbundle that.
I think that this medication abortion care makes the process of obtaining an abortion much easier. Our research on telehealth shows that people are feel relieved when they can access this care through telehealth from the privacy of their own home. And so I think it's people who are ideologically against abortion that are supporting such laws that restrict access to this medication, that makes abortion accessible. And for so many people, telehealth, in our research, telehealth has made the critical difference between being able to obtain this care and being forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term.
We want to bring in CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, good to see you. You know, the conversation that we've been having a lot lately about the Supreme Court is whether or not it is partisan. And I think that, and we've had some cases, though, that we've had a number of cases where the decisions are along, if you want to say it, partisan lines. This doesn't seem to be one of them.
Not at all. This is a unanimous decision. Justice Clarence Thomas is the only justice who wrote separately. It was a concurring opinion. But I will say this case, yes, it has to do with abortion and the conversation you've been having, in the sense that if the case had gone another way, it would severely restrict access to one of the pills that the majority of women who obtain abortions in this country use. But this case has everything to do with standing. So if you think about where would this case appear in a constitutional law textbook, it's under the standing doctrine. It's not under reproductive choice. This case, yes, is the first big case after Dobbs where we're talking about reproductive choice. Dobbs, of course, being the case that overturned Roe v. Wade. But it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not abortion is a protected liberty under the Constitution. It has everything to do with these doctors, this medical group, whether or not they could walk into the courthouse doors and say, I was injured enough to be able to move forward with my suit. I think this is a unanimous Supreme Court saying to the Fifth Circuit that allowed this case to continue, no, you got it wrong when you were talking about who could bring a federal case. And I think that's why you were able to get to a unanimous decision. I will say it's June 13th. As time goes by, we will be talking about some split decisions as well before the end of the month.
Yeah, so that standing question, Jessica, one of the things that is being reported and we've seen evidence from outside of the United States, which suggests, and this is a question also for the doctor, suggests that abortion pills are safe even among women who do not have a doctor to advise them. In other words, to take those pills. And you know, the fact that this is a unanimous decision means that the judges, the justices themselves saw that data perhaps and seem to indicate that why are you bringing this before us? Because it's been proven in other cases that women don't even need a doctor to take this. You don't need to be under this care to take Mifepristone.
Well, I think what I would say is, but they weren't even the doctors. And so to your question, which is an important one, these are not doctors prescribing Mifepristone, and these are not doctors who were forced to treat people who had rare side effects to Mifepristone. So part of what you heard in oral arguments, part of what you're seeing in the decision today is the court saying there are federal conscious objections. There are laws that protect people who have genuine concerns, moral and religious concerns about treating people under certain circumstances. You heard Justice Barrett mention this in oral arguments. She said, does this somehow undermine the conscious objection laws? And they said no. So what we have here are doctors, I think it's worth repeating, these are not the doctors who prescribe Mifepristone. These will not be the doctors who are forced to treat people who have those rare side effects. And I think those two things were fatal to their claim here. The medical groups made a different claim, which was essentially we're having to divert resources to this case, resources that we could use for other pieces, other things, other advocacy projects. And the court said, that's not an injury in fact. You have to yourself be injured. Essentially, what the court's saying is you're trying to jump into the shoes of people who might themselves have an injury. Let them bring a case, and then we will consider that case.
So then this could have been a different outcome if it actually was, a medical practitioner who would be the one prescribing this medication?
Yes, although I will say we would have had to come to a set of facts where it was a medical prescriber who, in my mind, would be forced to prescribe, which is not our current rubric, in meaning we really don't have doctors who are forced to prescribe medication because of those laws that say if you have a conscious objection, if you have a moral or religious reason that you don't want to treat, then we won't force you to. So, to your question, yes, we're getting closer if we're talking about doctors who do prescribe mifepristone, but I think there are other reasons why they wouldn't be the ones to bring the case.
And doctor, we can kind of see you, you're not on camera now, but we can see you kind of nodding along with what Jessica's saying.
Yes, that's right. In this case, the physicians that were part of this case, I understand that there were even dentists that were part of this case, and under no circumstances would a dentist or many of the doctors in this case ever be forced to treat someone who took these abortion medications.
All right, Jessica, Doctor, please stand by. Let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Shawna Mizelle, who's joining us now to discuss this. Shawna, specifically to you, what are the political implications of this ruling as abortion is on the ballot in several states? Remind us which states.
This case was highly politicized. You had the Biden administration that has really positioned themselves as a champion for reproductive freedoms. They blamed this case coming up on the overturning of Roe versus Wade and attempted to tie that to the legacy of former President Donald Trump. But as you mentioned, abortion is going to be in the ballot possibly in a couple states this November. And so it's already going to be a political issue that voters will be considering as they are considering who they want to choose for the presidency. States like Arizona and Nevada are where we could see this on the ballot, and those are going to be critical battleground states that are needed to win the presidency.
And Shawna, you know, we've had all kinds of polls and stuff suggesting that people are kind of nonplussed about this pairing, this Biden versus Trump competition again. And so, in fact, having ballot measures that have to do with abortion or other issues, this might be exactly what Democrats need or want in order to get more people to show up and vote in November.
The question is really going to be how galvanizing is the issue of abortion for those independent and swing voters in states like Arizona and Nevada, where they are a crucial voting bloc. Our polls from CBS News actually show that abortion is a potent issue for Democrats, but the numbers seem to wane when you look at Republicans and independents, and those are going to be that voting bloc that's needed to be brought over.
Have you received any political reaction at all? I know I mean, the decision just came down, but.
We had Republican Senator Josh Hawley on the Hill today say that he was actually there for the Supreme Court arguments, and so this decision does not surprise him. And I have to agree with the senator. A lot of that questioning, even from conservative justices like Amy Coney Barrett, really focused on standing, and it was kind of made clear that that was going to be what they hinged their decision on during that hearing, oral arguments.
And Shawna, you obviously have also been speaking to voters while you've been on the road and sort of digging more into Anne-Marie's question about the potential momentum that this could give Democrats heading into 2024. What are you hearing?
For many voters, economy is going to be the other issue that's at the top of mind. But for Democrats, those who are women, they really say that this is a potent issue for them. The question is how potent, and in states like Florida, where we know abortion will be on the ballot, will those voters support former President Donald Trump and abortion at the same time?
All right, Shawna Mizelle, stand by. I'm not sure if you're sticking around, but let's bring in CBS News' Jan Crawford, who is joining us from the Bureau in Washington. So Jan, for the audience who just may be joining us here at the bottom of the hour, at the half-hour mark, just break down this ruling, how it came to be, and what it means.
Well, I mean, this conservative kind of medical organization filed a lawsuit before a very conservative judge in Texas and argued that the FDA had not gone through the proper steps when it approved the most commonly used method of abortion, the abortion pill mifepristone. That was approved back in 2000, and then the FDA over the years kind of took more steps to make it easier for women to get. A federal appeals court in Louisiana then affirmed that judge. So you have 4 federal court judges saying and agreeing that this group could come into court, challenge this approval of this abortion pill, and that the FDA got it wrong. So that would have really restricted, if that decision carried the day, that would have really restricted women, even in states where abortion is legal, from getting the pill as easily as they do now. But today, in this unanimous opinion, which you guys have been discussing, written by Justice Kavanaugh, the court rejected those arguments, reversed the lower courts, and said that group, they came in here to challenge the FDA's approval, had no business filing a lawsuit in this case in the first place. They had, as you guys explained, no legal standing. That's an important concept because you can't just go into court because you don't like something. Like I can sit here and complain about this policy or that policy, but then I can't go, you know what, I'm going to sue about that. You have to be able to show that you have had some harm, the actual harm that may be imminent harm, direct harm. And here the court said in its unanimous 9-0 opinion written by Justice Kavanaugh, like I said, that these doctors and this organization simply could not show that they've been harmed at all by what the FDA did, that they didn't have to prescribe Mifepristone. They didn't have to treat people who may be harmed if they took Mifepristone. They don't have to take it themselves. So there was nothing that they could show that they had actually been harmed. So this is not a decision on the merits. Other groups can come in and try to challenge it, but I think based on the way the court has written this opinion today and the emphatic way they've come together, all 9 of them, it's going to be hard to challenge this down the road, too, for other groups and other people.
And you point out this isn't about whether or not you have a right to an abortion. It's whether or not the people who brought the case
have standing to do so. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But that being said, as you know, the court has taken a lot of criticism for certainly appearing to be partisan. And so for the court's own reputation, does it mean something that this was a unanimous decision on an abortion case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a good reminder, because we tend to focus, and then the commentary certainly focuses, and the outside groups, pile on the divisive cases, the ones that are 6-3 along liberal conservative lines. Those cases get the most attention. But, more than half the cases in the last couple terms have been unanimous. They come together on issues, whether it's procedural, technical. I mean, in many cases, these justices come together, or there'll be different lineups of justices, too. So, I mean, I think this is an important reminder that this court is functioning, that they do issue decisions. It's not purely political. They all agree here on this very important issue of jurisdiction, a threshold issue that is, ingrained in whether or not you can go into court at all. So coming together on that, on an issue is controversial. And like I said, 4 federal court judges had disagreed. They believed that this group could sue, and they believed that the FDA was wrong. They would have restricted the abortion pill, those 4 federal judges. And they were more conservative judges in Texas and in Louisiana. And the court today said, no, that's wrong. And we all agree.
Jan, for people who don't know the Supreme Court the way that you do, how do they decide who writes the opinion? And is there a significance for Justice Kavanaugh to have written that opinion?
The justice who is in the majority, after they have arguments, a day or so later, they'll go and have a private meeting in a conference room off the chambers of the Chief Justice, just the 9 of them, no law clerks, no one in there. And they go around the table and they vote. And whichever justice is in the majority would be the Chief Justice here, obviously in this case, because he's most senior. Whichever justice is in the majority that's the most senior will then make the opinion assignment. And that's a great question. I mean, no one's asked me that, Vlad. That's a great question. It's a real art to it. Because, if you're trying to think who should write the opinion, you want, if you've got a majority, you want to be able to keep the majority together. So you don't want to assign it to a justice that might, swing for the fences and write way too broadly and cause some other justice to be like, well, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to sign on to that. So Justice Kavanaugh is a careful judge. He can be very restrained in some of his writings. And standing is a very important procedural issue. And so, I mean, I think this opinion assignment actually did make a lot of sense. It did make a lot of sense.
Dr. Ushma, I know that we got to let you go. You're a busy person. So before we let you go, though, I just wanted to get kind of your kind of closing kind of commentary on this, but also on we're probably going to see other abortion-related cases rise up to the Supreme Court. So just kind of like your general closing comments and opinion on the way you see things.
Yeah, I see that mifepristone is extremely safe and effective. It is the most commonly used way to have an abortion. And I think, I hope that future judicial decisions will support that, will weigh the scientific evidence in making future decisions. I understand that in this case, it was more about standing. But as other cases come up, I hope that judges will remember the safety and effectiveness and the science that backs this medication.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor, very, very much. And Jessica, over to you now. And this is a question that I had asked earlier, but more than half of the people who get legal abortions in the United States and about 3/4 of the people who get them in Europe use medication abortion. And so when we talk about standing and we talk about the aftercare treatment that is required, particularly for women who take mifepristone, since states have banned abortion in the wake of the Dobbs decision, we're seeing women in states that ruling has happened turning to mail order abortion pills instead. And so now you even have foreign nonprofit groups that are shipping some women pills from overseas. I mean, these are some of the implications about the reversal of Dobbs that perhaps people didn't think of, like what these implications could be. What do you make of that?
Well, I think I think actually there were groups that I talked to before the Dobbs decision was overturned who were working on this issue, who knew that it was just a matter of time before Roe was going to be overturned, I believe, given the new composition of the court. And they were trying to figure out how to maintain access to abortion for women who live in states that had those so-called trigger laws, which means the moment that Roe v. Wade was overturned, that an abortion ban would trigger and would become law, and or who had promised to implement very restrictive laws. But I think to your question, it emphasizes the practical importance of the decision in the sense that this decision, as we've been saying over and over again, it's not about the court's view of reproductive choice. It's not about the court's view of what is protected under that word liberty in the Constitution. It's not about the court trying to backtrack from its Dobbs decision. It's about the court looking at who gets to sue. But what we do need to also acknowledge is the implications of this decision, right? So by saying the wrong people tried to sue, you keep the status quo. And the status quo means that the FDA's decisions in 2016 and 2021 to make it easier to obtain mifepristone, to be able to obtain mifepristone from 7 weeks to 10 weeks of pregnancy, for a telehealth appointment, as you've been discussing, all of those things stay in place. I will also say to your question where you've really highlighted the fact that we live in a patchwork in this country, and there are very different experiences for women depending on which state they live in, that this will only continue. And as you know, there's another big case that does deal with reproductive choice that's on the Supreme Court docket that we will talk about in the next 17 days, that deals with a federal law that says that you need to provide stabilizing treatment to patients, and a state law that says you can only give abortions when it is necessary to protect the health of the mother. So this isn't the end of the road for this court and reproductive choice.
All right, Shawna Mizelle, Jan Crawford, Jessica Levinson, always great to have all of you. Thank you so much for providing that clarity and the analysis that our viewers sorely need. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.